The story begins in silence. The kind of silence that belongs only to the heartland, the vast Midwestern plains of 1941. The wind moves through the corn like waves across a golden sea. A rusted windmill groans in the distance. A cow bellows, and a farmer leans on his plow beneath a wide, endless sky. Here, time feels ancient. The people of Kansas, Iowa, and Michigan live by the rhythm of the soil. Corn rises, corn falls. The seasons repeat like prayers. No one could imagine that beneath this peace, history was already stirring that soon. The land would thunder with engines meant for war. When the world was burning across oceans, the Midwest seemed far from danger. London was being bombed. Moscow was under siege. The Pacific trembled after Pearl Harbor. Yet in America's interior, tractors still traced lazy lines across the soil. And then came the call that shattered the quiet. The nation that once measured its harvest in bushels would soon measure its strength in bombers. From the whispers of corn came the roar of engines, the sound of B-24 Liberators rising from land once ruled by grass and cattle. Factories were still few. The country had no blueprint for such transformation. And yet, deep in those plains, something unimaginable began. The same barns that once stored corn would soon shelter machinery. The same rivers that powered grain mills would now cool engines. It was as if the land itself began to dream of flight. How could farmers, machinists, and schoolteachers turn their soil into steel? How could a tractor path become a runway, while Europe doubted and Japan calculated? America quietly turned its farmlands into foundries. Roosevelt's voice crackled through radios in December 1940. The arsenal of democracy. Those words traveled like lightning through the prairies. It was not just a political speech, it was a prophecy. Some men laughed in disbelief. Others rolled up their sleeves. Rural towns began to hum with a strange new rhythm, not of harvest, but of hammers. Grain silos were torn down. Foundations were poured in frozen ground. Engineers arrived where farmers had once bartered over livestock. They carried blueprints. But no one realized that what they were building would reshape the soul of a nation. A farmer's diary found decades later in Nebraska carried a single line. Smudged by oil and sweat, they say this soil will fly. And it did. By the time 1945 came, the same horizon that once shimmered with heat from cornfields now burned with exhaust flames from 1,000 engines. The impossible had taken flight. The earth had learned to roar. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? The news of Pearl Harbor struck America like lightning across open fields. December 7th, 1941, a Sunday morning that turned the entire nation into an army overnight. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's voice, calm but burning, echoed through millions of radios. We must build 10,000 airplanes. It was a command as impossible as it was urgent. At that moment, the United States had fewer than 500 active aircraft factories, most of them small workshops clustered near cities like Seattle or Los Angeles. But the war demanded the impossible, and so America decided to do it not in its cities, but in its soil. Who will build them? People asked. The engineers in Washington looked at maps, at the railroads, at the rivers, at the labor numbers, and then their fingers stopped on the Midwest. The heartland had something no blueprint could capture: people who worked without limits, land that could stretch into infinity, and a rhythm that already pulsed like a factory line. Farmers who had never seen the ocean suddenly found themselves building wings for bombers that would cross it. Cornfields were flattened, barns dismantled, silos hollowed out. Within months, thousands of new structures rose from the ground: hangars, workshops, machine halls built not by engineers, but by ordinary citizens who had spent their lives under the sun. They were strong, practical, relentless. They did not know metallurgy or aerodynamics, but they knew how to build things that lasted. Letters from the time tell of disbelief mixed with pride. One farmer from Iowa wrote to his brother at the front, "We built a factory right on Father's land. Yesterday it was corn. Tomorrow it will be wings." In places like Willow Run, Michigan, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, construction didn't stop at night. Floodlights turned darkness into day. The hum of generators replaced the chirp of crickets. Cafes stayed open past midnight, serving black coffee to men and women who wore overalls by day and welding masks by night. People began to joke that cornfields had become cities, but the truth was stranger. A new kind of city had been born, one without a mayor, without a skyline, but pulsing with raw, mechanical purpose. The smell of soil mixed with the scent of hot steel. By 1942, Roosevelt's impossible order began to take shape. Across the Midwest, blueprints spread faster than weeds. Engineers trained farmers, and farmers trained their sons. Teenagers drove trucks hauling steel beams over dirt roads that had once carried hay wagons. What began as desperation was turning into a miracle. America had answered the call from the sky with the hands of the earth. The morning light over Michigan shimmered on something no one had seen before, a factory stretching more than a mile long, built where corn had once waved in the summer wind. The Willow Run plant. To the locals, it seemed like a mirage, a steel ocean planted in their backyard in just months. Ford Motor Company had transformed farmland into the largest single manufacturing facility on Earth. The very same land that once grew wheat and corn now birthed aircraft capable of flying 2,000 miles and carrying 5 tons of bombs. It was Henry Ford's audacious gamble. "We'll build bombers like we build cars," he promised. His engineers adapted automobile assembly lines for aviation, an impossible idea at first. Airplanes were complex, delicate, made by craftsmen. But Ford saw something else. Mass production could make the sky an assembly line. His dream spread like wildfire across the Midwest. At Willow Run, they poured 1.5 million square feet of concrete and installed 10 miles of conveyor belts. When finished, it could produce one B-24 every 63 minutes, a record that defied belief. Newspapers called it the plant that makes planes like pancakes. For the first time in human history, flight had become an industrial rhythm. The sounds were mesmerizing. Rivet guns snapped like thunderclaps. Sparks rained down from catwalks. The air tasted of metal and heat. At lunch, workers leaned against unfinished fuselages, eating sandwiches beside the wings of bombers that would soon cross the Atlantic. And just outside the fences, the land remembered what it once was, the faint smell of hay lingering in the wind. A machinist named Ralph Gorman kept a small notebook in his pocket. One line survived the decades. "When I look up, I don't see clouds anymore. I see blueprints." He was right. The entire sky had become a design, a plan, a purpose. And yet, there was something deeply human about the chaos. Machines broke, tools jammed, workers argued. But every day, more people arrived, men, women, even high school students. They came by train from Chicago, by bus from rural Ohio, by foot from neighboring farms, at night, from a hilltop outside Willow Run. The view was surreal. The factory glowed like a city of stars. Every window spilled light onto the dark fields. Planes rolled out of hangars and lined up on runways that sliced through the earth like veins of fire. A farmer passing by in 1943 stopped his horse-drawn cart and whispered to his son, "The land is learning to fly." The boy nodded, watching the lights disappear into the clouds. By then, America's landscape had been rewritten from the color of corn to the color of aluminum. The transformation was complete. The ground had given birth to the sky. By 1943, the heartland of America no longer smelled of corn and rain, but of oil, sweat, and hot steel. The people had changed with the land. The same hands that once held shovels and pitchforks now gripped welding torches and drills. Calloused palms were stained with grease instead of soil. Men who once rose before dawn to milk cows now clocked in under blinding factory lights, their faces hidden behind goggles, their breaths mixing with the hiss of compressors. Women, too, filled the hangars, housewives, teachers, and daughters of farmers, all stepping into a world that had never welcomed them before. They tied their hair with red scarves and tightened their gloves. Every clang of metal was a statement, "We can do this too." In the corner of one workshop at Willow Run, a teenage girl named Evelyn kept a small notebook by her machine. She wrote, "I used to plant corn, now I plant wings." That line, found years later, became a symbol of the transformation. The factories never slept. 3 shifts kept the machines alive 24 hours a day. The night shift, nicknamed the Midnight Farmers, worked under floodlights so bright they could be seen for miles. When they walked home at dawn, their faces were pale with exhaustion, but lit with quiet pride. "I'm not just making a living," one woman told a reporter. "I'm making freedom." The gossip of the time carried strange poetry. People talked about how entire families worked in the same plant, the father riveting panels, the mother assembling engines, the teenage son hauling fuel. Cafes served breakfast to people getting off work at 4 a.m. Milk trucks delivered to hangars instead of doorsteps. Even the small-town barbers joked that everyone now smelled like aluminum dust. And among them were those who never expected to stand side by side: white farmers, black laborers from the South, Mexican migrants, women from Detroit, all welding the same dream together for the first time. The factory floor became a place where class and color blurred in the sparks of shared purpose. Accidents were frequent. Tools fell, engines overheated, tempers flared, but no one stopped. The war gave them no luxury of rest. Each worker knew that somewhere across the ocean, a soldier's life might depend on their precision, on the strength of a rivet, on the curve of a wing. One night, during a blackout drill, the entire factory fell silent. The machines stopped. The lights died, and for a moment, the workers could hear only the wind sweeping across the old fields outside. It sounded like the ghosts of harvests past whispering approval. When the lights came back, work resumed, louder than before. America had learned a new way to pray with hammers. By the summer of 1944, the cornfields of America had become something transcendent, a landscape where earth and sky had merged. Dawn over Michigan, Kansas, and Oklahoma no longer brought the quiet rustle of crops, but the thunder of engines warming for flight. The air trembled as B-24 Liberators and B-17 Flying Fortresses rolled down runways, cut straight through the soil. Hundreds of bombers stood in perfect rows, their silver bodies glinting in the sunrise like a new crop ready for harvest. Onlookers gathered beyond the fences. Old farmers, mothers with children, and workers coming off the night shift stood together as the roar began. The first engines ignited, one after another, until the air vibrated like an orchestra. Reporters described it as the loudest hymn ever sung to human effort. Among the crowd was an elderly farmer named Charles McIntyre, whose family had tilled that same ground for 3 generations. He watched as a B-24 lifted into the sky and whispered, "That was my father's field, and now it flies." The people around him said nothing. They simply watched as the silver wings vanished into the morning light, a symbol too sacred for applause. Each takeoff was more than machinery. It was the sound of a nation's will taking flight. Pilots often wrote back to the workers who built their planes, thanking them for the souls stitched into the metal. One letter from a young airman to a Willow Run riveter read, "When I fly, I imagine your hands holding this plane together. Don't let go." Inside the factories, production reached its peak, 1 bomber every 63 minutes at Willow Run, dozens more from Tulsa, Omaha, and Fort Worth. Yet beyond the numbers lay moments of tenderness that no statistic could measure. Workers would pause when a newly finished plane rolled out, removing their caps in silence. Some even wrote messages inside the fuselages. "Good luck. Boys, come home safe or from the soil. With love." The towns around the plants lived in rhythm with these launches. Church bells rang when new aircraft were completed. Local newspapers printed the serial numbers as if announcing the birth of a child. Farmers helped clear emergency runways on their land for test flights. For the first time, the Midwest looked upward, not to pray for rain, but to watch the fruit of its labor ascend into history. And yet, beneath the glory, there was an ache, a quiet awareness that the same wings lifting toward freedom would also rain destruction far away. A worker's son once asked, "Dad, do those planes ever come back?" His father hesitated before answering softly, "Some do, some don't." The sky had risen from the earth, but not without a price. Where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever stood in a place that still echoes with the past, where the land remembers what it once was? By late 1944, America's skies had become a living monument to human will. The rhythm of production was no longer just industry, it was religion. "We can do" it wasn't a slogan anymore. It was gospel. Every shift began like a ritual. The whistle blew, the conveyor belts hummed, sparks flew, and faith and effort replaced fear of failure. From dawn to dusk, and long past midnight, The thunder of machinery echoed across the land that once grew nothing but corn. The scale was staggering. In less than 4 years, the United States had produced over 300,000 aircraft, more than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. In 1940, the nation had built fewer than 3,000. By 1944, it was turning out 96,000 planes a year, nearly one every 5 minutes. The transformation defied reason, but not belief. The people had learned to think not in acres, but in engines. The soil of America had sprouted wings. The stories spread like folklore. In small-town cafes, truckers told of trains hauling entire bomber fuselages at midnight. School teachers whispered that a new plant could build a plane faster than a loaf of bread could bake. One rumor claimed that a B-17 was once finished by workers who had never even seen a plane before, and yet it flew perfectly on its first test. No one knew if it was true, but everyone believed it, because by then, belief itself was part of the machinery. Inside the factories, exhaustion had become a badge of honor. Men slept between shifts on cafeteria benches. Women washed the metal dust from their hair in tin sinks before catching the 4 a.m. bus home. When an accident happened, a slip, a burn, a collapsed worker, production paused only long enough for silence, then resumed, heavier but undeterred. They knew what they were building would decide the fate of continents. Even prisoners of war brought from Europe, Germans and Italians, once sworn enemies, now labored under American supervision. Painting, lifting, welding. Many of them were stunned by what they saw. One German officer later admitted in a diary entry in America, "Even their farms can build war. We never understood their strength. It was not just about weapons. It was about faith in common hands. And yet, beneath the glory, there were cracks, fatigue, broken marriages, empty cribs. The workers fought a quieter battle, one against time, against themselves." As one woman scribbled on a locker door, "We're building wings, but we've forgotten to rest." Still, the spirit never faltered. The people had turned their pain into power, their faith into flame. They had invented a new kind of worship of possibility. And you watching this story unfold, what would you have done in their place? Would you have believed enough to turn your soil into steel? Would you have kept working when the world doubted you? When the war finally ended in 1945, the engines fell silent. The floodlights dimmed. The conveyor belts that had once sung like a chorus of thunder stood motionless in the half-dark. Willow Run, the miracle factory that had given birth to a bomber every hour, became a ghost of its former self, an ocean of empty floors, silent cranes, and echoes of footsteps that no longer returned. Outside, the land began to heal. Grass pushed through cracks in the runways. Weeds climbed the fences. The scent of soil returned. The same wind that had once carried the smell of machine oil now drifted with the sweetness of spring. For the first time in years, people could hear the sound of birds again. The land had remembered its name, but the people had changed. Those who had once bent over machines now looked up at the sky differently. They had seen their labor rise into the clouds and vanish toward distant wars. They had witnessed what human hands could do, both magnificent and terrible. Some could never forget it. A worker named Evelyn, the same girl who once wrote, "I plant wings," kept her welding gloves in a box for the rest of her life. On the tag, she had written to remind me that even soil can dream. Children played where bombers once rolled out. They built paper airplanes and let them glide over grass that had once been scorched by exhaust. Old men sat on porches, pointing to the horizon, telling stories that sounded like fables. That's where the earth learned to fly, they'd say, and every listener fell quiet, as if hearing something sacred. Willow Run's hangars were sold, reused, abandoned, reborn. Some became warehouses, others training centers. But to those who had known its fire, the memory never faded. At night, when the moonlight hit the old metal walls, some swore they could still hear the ghostly hum of rivet guns, the heartbeat of a generation that refused to give up. A former foreman once said in a documentary, "We didn't just build planes, we built belief." He was right. America's strength was not in steel or numbers, but in the faith that ordinary people, farmers, mothers, teachers, could create something greater than themselves. And when the last hangar door closed, it was not an ending. It was a breath, the long exhale after years of holding it in. The land slept again, but deep beneath its soil, where seeds and memories intertwine, something eternal remained the proof that even the humblest ground can give birth to the sky. The war ended, but its echoes never left the land. Across the Midwest, the wind still moves through the grass with a rhythm that feels almost mechanical, as if somewhere beneath the soil. The hum of engines still stirs. People say history fades, but in places like Willow Run, it lingers in the air, invisible yet heavy, like the warmth that stays after fire. Those who lived through it rarely spoke of glory. They spoke of exhaustion, of pride, of quiet disbelief that they had done the impossible. They had taken the ordinary corn, soil, sweat, hands, and built something that touched the sky. It wasn't just industry that changed them, it was purpose. They had learned that power could grow from humility, that courage could bloom in silence, that faith could be built like a machine, one bolt, one wing, one day at a time, many years later. When documentaries revisited the story, survivors smiled with a mix of wonder and sorrow. One elderly woman, sitting by her porch in Ypsilanti, looked toward the old fields and said softly, "When the wind blows just right, I can still hear the rivet guns." She wasn't imagining things. What she heard was memory itself. A sound passed from earth to air, from generation to generation, in the end. The story of America's wartime transformation was never just about machines or victory. It was about what happens when a nation believes that even the simplest hands can build miracles. From corn to steel, from silence to thunder, from soil to sky, it was the same story, told 1,000 ways, all ending with the same truth when ordinary people believe. The world itself can learn to fly.